anything tangible or easy to read, and I think it's very different what's on the page from what's performed. When I perform, I get nervous, like I used to get nervous before I fall, and so I just get really angry. And I think that very few people kind of are involved in a poetry or a philosophy of anger or of violence, and I think that's very interesting, so I try to explore that.
I know you're a poet, but you're a spoken word artist. That was like incredible. So are you also an actor stroke spoken word artist? Because that was like...
Definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, I suppose that's nice of you to say, but I think a huge part of it is kind of, as I've become interested in poetry, and I've realised the expanse of poetry and what a lot of people would term experimental poetry, which is a division, it's such a dualism, such an unnecessary dualism to place formal and experimental poetry, but most people have said I'm experimental, but...
Because your punctuation's like really blurred.
Yeah.
But that, I find that really interesting. That's why it was almost, you could almost, like the last one's almost like a, like it's wrong way, I mean it's positively, like a rap. Like you could literally perform that as something, it wasn't necessarily a narrative poem.
No, it was a sound poem. Essentially the methodology of that poem is to take a sequence perhaps that I've written as prose, I think it's commentary of a boxing match, and then I've just lifted loads of syllables out of it, and then also I just walked it as I'm reading it. I think again, whatever's on the page changes so much when I perform, because I think they're completely different things. So, yeah, I just try and generate certain sounds. I'm very interested also in oppression and ideas of fascism. They all come into the same thing. So I think I'm very kind of, it's only since January this year I've been reading, and I feel like I'm in the very infancy of that. But I'm very attracted to that kind of, taking a piss out of it, but that kind of fascist mentality. I find it very difficult to sit back and kind of present and be like, good evening. This is my poetry, you know. No disrespect, perhaps it suits the method of the poetry. You probably couldn't read poetry like that. It seems much more kind of applicable to me, to my mentality and to my work, to perhaps have a blimp in front of me and kind of bang my hand and hit the rise, as some people have said that I do. I quite like that, and pace. And I also think it is good, genuinely, because the aesthetics of poetry readings are something that I don't enjoy a lot of the time. I get maybe a little bit bored, or I find it a little bit staid, and I have put a lot of people off, but I'd rather people were afraid than bored. Not that you were afraid.
There was so much energy there, and I find it actually quite musical as well. The consonants of your consonants.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
But also, kind of not really related in a way, your poem, it made me think of, have you ever seen the Red Riding trilogy?
Yeah, David Peace books.
Yeah, it made me think of them, and also two films, Daniel Day-Lewis is in The Boxer and In the Name of the Father. And all those three are all about corruption in the system and everything, and what you're kind of saying about oppression and everything, and it really, straight away, I was just kind of there, kind of thing.
I think that the language of oppression, especially without becoming too political, but within governmental systems or within media, it's very easy to be angry about that. I think that there's a lot of beauty in that kind of, there's a lot of beauty in violence, and rarely are people putting themselves in the position of the one. I wouldn't consider myself a violent person ever, but I think that there is something about that when you inhabit it, to parody it, to take that language back and to kind of give it out in a completely ridiculous way, where the context of this is a poetry reading where everyone is completely comfortable and is aware of what those words are doing. I think that's very valuable, and perhaps not being done very much considering how pervasive certain elements of language are in our culture. So boxing as a sport, I love it, but also sport is a distraction for people and also a way for them to vicariously get their chauvinism and their kind of repression and frustration out. And if you go to a boxing match, it's not like watching on TV, it's a horrible experience. And prisons, the methodology of this, people saying prisons are holiday camps and hellholes, I'm sure. So there's so many things that you can play with, I think.
We need to move along, but we can again loop back. I mean, one of the things that we do hope actually that everyone will feel interested in doing as we go on is coming to lots of readings. There are really live scenes in London of varying emphases, and we've plugged into a number of them, and it is worth looking at performance and looking at the way that people perform their poetry at the moment in London across an enormous range. So we will be notifying you about events and things like that, which we will be going to, and if you want to come on, that